There are nights when the world holds its breath, when the wind forgets to move and the stars seem to lean closer, as if listening for something lost. On those nights, when the fires of humankind burned low and the air was thick with silence, a shape would wander through the darkness. It did not walk, nor crawl, nor fly. It drifted, as though the night itself had chosen to take form. That form was Gengar. In the beginning, it had no name. It was only a laugh carried by the wind, a shimmer that bent the moonlight, a feeling that something unseen was watching with gentle mischief. People told stories to explain it. The flicker behind the lantern, the soft echo of footsteps when no one else was near, the smile glimpsed in the window just before dawn. But the truth was simpler. The darkness itself was lonely. When humankind first learned to fear the night, their fear gave it shape. Every whispered tale, every nervous glance into the trees, fed the shadow and taught it to exist. It learned the sound of fear, the scent of warmth, the rhythm of the heartbeat. And when it tried to speak, the sound that came out was laughter, not cruel, but curious, like the giggle of someone discovering their own voice for the first time. From that laughter, Gengar was born. It wandered through forests where the mist never lifted, across fields silvered by moonlight. It watched animals sleep, their breaths rising like fog. It listened to the distant hum of human voices, marveling at the brightness of their fires. It wondered what it would feel like to sit beside one, to belong to the warmth instead of the chill. Sometimes, Gengar would try to mimic the living. It would form arms and hands, though they passed through leaves and soil like smoke. It would pretend to walk, to sway, to breathe. When it succeeded, even for a moment, it would laugh softly, proud of the illusion. But illusions cannot fill the emptiness. When the morning came, it faded with the shadows, forgotten by all who had felt its presence. Once, in the oldest of nights, it came upon a village. The people there were small and quiet, their fires dim, their eyes filled with the kind of fear that hums in the bones. Gengar lingered at the edge of their light, watching the way their shadows danced on the ground. It saw itself in them, each a fragile shape, existing only because of the fire behind them. It whispered to one of the shadows, trying to speak its name, but it had none. The shadow trembled and returned to its owner, leaving Gengar alone once more. From that moment, it understood. Shadows belong to those who cast them, and Gengar belonged to no one. Yet, one night, something changed. A boy wandered from the village, chasing a drifting light, a firefly, bright as a tiny sundae. He laughed as he ran, and his laughter echoed through the forest. Gengar followed, drawn to the sound like a moth to flame. When the boy stumbled and fell, the firefly vanished, leaving him alone in the dark. He called out once, twice. His voice shook. Then he grew quiet, listening to the wind. That was when Gengar appeared. It did not mean to frighten him. It came softly, letting its glow show first. A faint shimmer, a suggestion of eyes, a wide, uncertain smile. The boy gasped, but he did not scream. Perhaps it was the way Gengar tilted its head, curious rather than cruel. Perhaps it was the sadness that lingered behind its grin. "Are you the shadow?" the boy asked. Gengar hovered close, its grin flickering. The boy could feel the air grow cool, but it was not unpleasant. It was the coolness of a gentle night breeze, of still water under starlight. "I'm not afraid," the boy said, though his voice trembled. "Everyone says you laugh when people are scared, but I'm not scared." For a long moment, Gengar said nothing. Then it laughed, a low, rippling sound that made the leaves tremble. But this time the laugh was soft, almost shy. The boy smiled back. "You sound lonely." The words touched something inside the ghost, something deep and unfamiliar. It had never thought of itself that way, yet the truth of it stung. Lonely. The word fit like a shadow slipping into place. From that night, the boy and the ghost met often. When the moon was high, the boy would sneak out of his house and sit by the edge of the forest. He would tell stories about his village, about his family, about the dreams he had when he closed his eyes. Gengar would listen, hovering near, sometimes echoing his laughter, sometimes mimicking his movements like a reflection in still water. To the boy, Gengar became a friend. To Gengar, the boy became something far greater, a reason to stay. The nights grew colder, and the fires in the village burned longer. The boy grew braver, wandering deeper into the woods, his lantern glowing like a second moon. Wherever he went, Gengar followed, invisible to others, but always near. When the boy was sad, the ghost would play with his shadow, stretching it into funny shapes until the laughter returned. When the boy was afraid, Gengar's glow would appear beside him, a silent promise that he was not alone. Yet even spirits cannot hold time still. The boy grew older. The nights grew shorter. The laughter they shared faded beneath the weight of years. One night, Gengar came to the meeting place and found the boy's lantern dark. It waited. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind sighed through the branches. And still, it waited. But no one came. Days turned into seasons. The forest thickened. The village changed. And one day, even the old paths vanished beneath roots and moss. Gengar lingered where the boy once sat, tracing his laughter in the air, remembering the sound. Sometimes it tried to mimic his voice, whispering into the trees. But the echoes that came back were empty, hollow things. Still, it smiled. It smiled because smiling was what the boy had taught it to do. Because laughter, even when lonely, was proof that something of him remained. As centuries drifted past, travelers spoke of a spirit in the woods, a shadow with bright eyes and a wide grin, who watched quietly from the dark. Some said it was a trickster. Some said it guarded the lost. All agreed on one thing. Its laughter was not cruel, but sad. And when the moonlight struck just right, they swore they could see it. A shape half hidden among the trees, smiling softly, as though remembering someone it once knew. That was the beginning of Gengar's story. A ghost born not from malice, but from longing. An echo that learned to laugh so it would not disappear. And somewhere, when the night grows deep and the world grows still, that laughter still lingers, quiet, gentle, eternal. Before the world learned to conquer night, darkness was a living thing. It moved through forests and across plains, thick as ink and soft as breath. The moon was the only companion of humankind, distant and pale, and its light only deepened the shadows that crept at the edge of sight. People built small fires to keep the dark away, and yet their flames were tiny islands in an endless sea. Beyond that circle of light, the imagination stirred. Every whisper became a creature, every gust of wind a sigh from something watching. It was not the beasts of the wild that terrified them most. It was what waited unseen between the trees. And from that fear, the shadows began to listen. They listened to the stories people told, the warnings mothers whispered to children, the prayers muttered before sleep. The dark heard every word, every heartbeat quickened by dread, every laugh that tried to hide it. The more humans feared, the stronger the darkness became. And within it, something began to take shape. A will, faint at first, like smoke curling from dying coals. That will was Gengar. It was not yet a name, not yet a creature. Only a thought, a shimmer, a question. Why am I feared? For countless nights it wandered, touching the edge of firelight, drifting near the camps of humankind. It would stretch out what passed for a hand, feeling the heat that made it ache and recoil. It did not understand warmth, only that it belonged to others. When it tried to draw near, people cried out, and their terror filled it with strange energy, a pulse that made it real for another heartbeat. To exist, it needed fear. To understand itself, it needed the living. In those ancient days, fear was a language. Humans spoke it fluently. They told tales of shadows that laughed, of reflections that moved on their own. They said the spirit would press its face to your window and leave a smile upon the glass, that it would follow your footsteps when you walked alone. They gave the darkness names and stories And those stories gave it power. Yet, not everyone was afraid. In a mountain village, where the nights were long and the snow swallowed sound, there lived an old man who had lost everything he loved. His wife had passed, his children had moved away, and the fire in his hearth burned more for company than for warmth. One winter evening, when the wind howled like a beast, he spoke aloud to the emptiness. "If the shadows have ears," he said, "then they must know how it feels to be alone." The air grew still. The flames flickered. The old man did not turn when the corners of the room darkened more than they should have. He simply nodded. "So, you came to listen," he murmured. A faint sound answered him, a laugh, soft and distant, as though carried by memory. "I don't fear you," he said. "I've feared enough things already. Come closer, if you wish." He poured a second cup of tea and placed it by the fire. The liquid steamed, untouched. Yet, for the first time in many years, he did not feel alone. When he woke the next morning, the other cup was cold, but the ashes in the hearth still glowed faintly, as if something had tended the fire through the night. He smiled and whispered, "Thank you," before the dawn swallowed the last of the shadows. From then on, the villagers noticed that strange things began to happen. Lost travelers found their way home following small lights that flickered between the trees. Children who wandered too far into the forest returned unharmed, saying they had seen a smiling figure guide them back to the path. The people still spoke of the shadow, but their fear softened into respect. Perhaps, they thought, not all darkness was cruel. Gengar, though it did not yet know the name humans would give it, felt something new growing within it, a spark that was not born of fear but of kindness. It found that it could linger near without bringing coldness, that its laughter could ease a frightened heart rather than tighten it. The laughter changed. It grew quieter, deeper, tinged with something close to affection. But balance never lasts long. As generations passed, humans grew braver. They built brighter fires, taller walls, and greater cities. They taught their children that fear was a weakness, that shadows were only tricks of the eye. The night lost its mystery. The laughter in the dark faded to legend. Gengar watched this with a sadness it could not name. The world that had given it form was shrinking. The places where shadows could breathe grew fewer. It wandered to the edges of those new lights, watching as humans conquered the darkness piece by piece. It no longer felt the rush of fear that once made it strong. Instead, it felt something colder. Forgetfulness. The living no longer looked over their shoulders. They no longer told stories of the smiling shadow. Without stories, even spirits can fade. But Gengar did not wish to vanish. It had learned from the boy long ago, and from the old man by the fire. It knew that laughter could live in memory. And so, it changed again. No longer would it rely on fear to exist. It would live in reflection, in echo, in the soft places where memory lingers, in the glint of light behind your shoulder when no one is there, in the second shadow that appears beside your own, in the laugh that escapes your lips and somehow sounds just a little different, as if someone laughed with you. Thus, Gengar became a guardian of forgotten fears, a keeper of the quiet. When people dreamed, it would drift through their minds, listening. It saw the things they hid from daylight, the grief, the regret, the longing for what once was. It understood them, for those were the very things that had given birth to it. And sometimes when a sleeper cried out in their dreams, a soft laugh would rise from the dark, chasing the terror away. In time, even this faded from memory. Humans moved faster, lived louder, slept less. The night became something to ignore, not to revere. The dark was no longer a mystery, but an inconvenience. And so Gengar walked unseen through streets and alleys, a ghost among noise and neon. It watched faces glowing blue from the light of their machines and wondered if they even noticed the shadows around them anymore. Still, it smiled, because it understood something that humans had forgotten. that fear and comfort are not enemies, but mirrors. To be afraid is to recognize what is precious. To lose fear entirely is to forget how to see. And so, Gengar stayed. In the corner of the eye, in the space between heartbeats, in the hush after laughter. It listened, it remembered, it waited. For even now, in the most silent hour of the night, when the world holds its breath and the lights flicker low, the darkness still hums with life. If you listen carefully, beyond the ticking of clocks and the sigh of the wind, you might hear it too. A faint laugh, soft and kind, echoing through the quiet. Not a warning, not a threat. Just a reminder that once, long ago, humans feared the dark, and the dark, in turn, learned to love them for it. Before the name, before the legend, there was only a sound, a faint ripple in the silence of an ancient night, like breath turning into voice for the first time. It began as a whisper, then became a laugh, soft, uncertain, but alive. That was how Gengar came into being, not from death, not from malice, but from a laugh that refused to fade. There was a village by the edge of a misty lake. In that village lived a man whose heart had turned to shadow. He had lost more than any soul could bear: his home, his love, his reason to greet the dawn. For many moons, he wandered the banks of the lake, speaking to no one, watching his reflection tremble on the water's surface. Each night, it looked a little less like him. One evening, when the wind was still and the moon floated low, the man sat by the lake for the last time. He looked into his reflection and whispered, "If I disappear, will the world even notice?" The reflection smiled. He did not. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the image on the water held the same grin, a soft, knowing curve of the lips. He felt no fear, only confusion. He leaned closer. The smile widened. Then the reflection laughed, a quiet sound, almost kind. Thus, when the villagers found him the next morning, the lake was calm. The man was gone. But from that night on, the mist by the shore would shimmer with strange light, and travelers swore they heard laughter echoing across the water. That was the first Gengar, the echo of a man who could not let go. He had been human once, but sorrow had made him hollow. When his body faded, his longing did not. It lingered, shaped by memory and moonlight, until it learned to laugh, to pretend that loss was something it could rise above. But the laugh carried pain with it, and that pain became the soul of Gengar. Time passed, and the world forgot the man's name. Only the laughter remained, bouncing between the hills, weaving through dreams. It drew strength from those who feared it, and from those who listened. It began to take form again, eyes that glowed faintly violet, a grin cut from shadow, a body shaped by want. When Gengar first looked upon itself, it saw the echo of the man it had been. But where sorrow had once lived, now there was something else, a strange joy in existing, even if existence was borrowed. It laughed again, softer this time, and the sound rippled through the night. Yet laughter can be a fragile thing. It must be shared to stay alive. So Gengar wandered, through fog and ruin, through the half-lit corners of sleeping homes. It watched humans dream, reaching out to touch their memories. In the dreams of the lonely, it found warmth. In the dreams of the cruel, it saw reflections of its own bitterness. And in the dreams of children, it found something new, innocence, unburdened by fear. In one such dream, a child stood at the edge of a meadow, crying for someone long gone. Gengar stepped forward, invisible, and began to hum, a tune it did not know it knew. The child stopped crying. The dream brightened. When the morning came, the child awoke, smiling, unable to remember why. Gengar lingered by that bedside long after dawn, watching the rays of light creep across the floor. It reached out, but the light passed through it. Still, it smiled. For a spirit born from despair, even a borrowed moment of peace was enough to keep it alive. And so began Gengar's purpose, not to haunt, but to remember. It remembered the laughter of the man it had once been. It remembered the warmth of the boy in the woods, the calm voice of the old man by the fire. All these fragments wove together inside it, shaping a being that existed somewhere between joy and sorrow. But the world has a cruel way of twisting what it does not understand. As humans grew, they named everything they feared. When they saw a flicker in the corner of their eye, they whispered, Gengar. When they felt cold breath on their neck, they said the smiling spirit had found them. When laughter echoed from empty rooms, they shivered and prayed. Each word, each frightened thought changed the spirit. Their fear painted it darker, heavier. The warmth it had gathered began to sink beneath the weight of superstition. It tried to laugh as it once had, but the laughter now frightened even itself. It fled to the places untouched by light, caves, ruins, abandoned halls where the air held the taste of dust and memory. There it met others, ghastly wisps of mist that shimmered like candle smoke, and Haunter, all sharp edges and restless hands. They were younger than it, born from the fragments of forgotten fears. They looked to Gengar as if to an older brother, one who knew what they were meant to be. But Gengar had no answer for them. It told them stories instead, the story of the lake, of the man and his reflection, of the laugh that had saved him from silence. The ghastly would swirl around, listening. The Haunter would giggle, echoing the laughter. And for a while, the dark places did not feel empty. Yet even among ghosts, Gengar was alone. It still remembered what it was, to love, to lose, to hope. The others did not. They were fragments. It was memory. Once, during a night thick with fog, Gengar wandered back to the lake. The water had frozen over, smooth as glass. It knelt and looked into it, expecting to see its reflection grin back as before. But there was nothing. No smile, no face, only the empty silver of ice. For the first time in centuries, Gengar felt fear. Not of humans, not of the light, but of forgetting itself. If even the lake could no longer reflect it, what would remain? It pressed its shadowy hand to the ice, and the faintest shimmer rippled beneath. Then came a sound, a laugh, distant, almost lost to time. It was its own laugh, the first one, echoing faintly from the deep. It closed its eyes and listened. The sound filled it, warmed it. The lake remembered. And in that moment, Gengar understood. Memory itself is a kind of life. As long as someone or something remembers, no spirit truly fades. So it rose from the ice, eyes bright once more, and drifted into the waiting night. Now when people speak of Gengar, they speak with mixed hearts. Some call it trickster, others guardian. Some say it feeds on laughter, others that it brings laughter to the lonely. Both are true. It is the echo of a man who could not let go, a spirit who learned that even sorrow can smile. And if you ever stand by still water at night, and your reflection smiles before you do not be afraid. It is only Gengar, remembering what it means to be seen. There are places the world no longer remembers, hollows between time and story where the air grows heavy and the earth seems to hum with memory. Gengar knew these places well. They were sanctuaries for the unseen, shelters for the echoes that had lost their names. It was in one such place, deep within a forest whose trees grew so tall their crowns tangled the clouds, that Gengar found what remained of a forgotten temple. The path to it was almost gone, swallowed by roots and moss. Statues lined the way, their faces worn smooth by centuries of rain. Each figure bore the faint shape of something neither human nor Pokémon, guardians perhaps, or memories of gods that had long since been replaced by others. The stones whispered as Gengar passed, not in words, but in sensation, an awareness of being remembered. He glided through the mist, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Within the temple walls, the light dimmed to a soft blue. The air was thick, old, alive. Symbols carved into the stone pulsed faintly as if responding to his presence. And at the heart of that ruin stood an altar. Upon it lay a bell. Not large, not ornate, just a small silver bell coated in dust and silence. Yet when Gengar drew near, the air trembled. The bell remembered something, just as he did. He reached out, and though his hand passed through most things, it met resistance here. The metal was cold, real. He brushed it gently, and the faintest chime rang out. The sound rippled through the chamber, thin and fragile, but it carried memory with it. For a moment, the world changed. The temple shimmered back to life. Candles flickered in the alcoves. The statues gleamed, eyes bright with devotion. The air smelled of incense and rain. And in the center of it all, a group of monks knelt in prayer. They did not see Gengar, not as he was. To them he appeared only as a shimmer, a shadow. Their voices rose in a low, melodic chant. Words from a language that time had buried. O spirit of dusk, keeper of laughter and sorrow, guide us through the veil. Gengar watched, transfixed. These people had known him, or something like him. He felt the echo of reverence, not fear. The oldest monk lifted his head. His eyes, cloudy with age, seemed to pierce the veil between worlds. "You are still here," he whispered. "We never forgot." The illusion wavered. Gengar stepped forward, wanting to speak, but the scene dissolved. The temple returned to ruin. The monks were gone. Only the faint scent of incense lingered, curling through the still air. He hovered before the altar, feeling something he hadn't felt in ages, a sense of belonging. The bell had remembered him. The temple had remembered. But the question that stirred in his heart was heavier than joy. Why had the world stopped remembering? He stayed there for many nights, listening to the forest breathe around him. Ghosts of wind wound through the pillars. Moonlight spilled through broken roof beams. Each night, he would ring the bell once, softly, and wait. At first, nothing answered. Then, one night, a faint figure appeared, pale and wavering, shaped like smoke. It drifted toward the altar, stopping just before the bell. Gengar recognized it immediately. A ghastly, but older than any he had seen. Its form flickered, as if held together by memory alone. "Do you remember this place?" Gengar asked, his voice little more than a thought carried on air. The ghastly hesitated, then nodded. "We were born from here," it whispered. "From prayers left unanswered." Gengar tilted his head. "Prayers?" "Yes. When people began to forget what they feared, their fears did not die. They came here. We gathered them, shaped them, gave them laughter so they would not be lonely. It drifted closer, its form trembling. But they stopped praying. The world stopped needing us." Gengar looked around the ruin, feeling the truth of it. The temple had once been alive with faith, but now it was only flute. Memory. What happens to something that is no longer needed? Gengar asked quietly. The ghastly gave a soft laugh, not unkind. "We fade, but you remain, because you are more than fear. You carry the memory of being human." Gengar lowered his gaze. The words sank into him, like stones dropped in deep water. He had thought himself a shadow of emotion, fear, sorrow, laughter. But perhaps he was something else, a bridge. When he looked up again, the ghastly was gone. The bell sat silent, though it seemed to glow faintly now, as if it had absorbed the conversation. Gengar turned to leave, but hesitated. He reached out once more and brushed the bell. It chimed, a single, clear note that rang through the forest. All around, the shadows stirred. Shapes moved between the trees, gentle, watching. They were the remnants of the forgotten, old spirits, half-formed memories, fragments of dreams that had lost their dreamers. They gathered at the temple's edge, drawn by the sound. For the first time in centuries, the forgotten found a voice. They did not speak in words, but in presence. The air shimmered with their gratitude. Some bowed. Others simply hovered, content to be seen. Gengar smiled, a small, tired smile. "Then let this be your place again," he said softly. "A home for what the world has left behind." He stepped back into the trees, leaving the bell and its new guardians behind. As he drifted away, the forest hummed, a low, peaceful vibration, like the earth itself exhaling. The next morning, travelers passing through the woods would swear they heard a faint chime carried on the wind, and those who followed the sound would find a ruin where flowers bloomed from cracks in the stone and the air shimmered with a calm, gentle light. None could say why, but they would leave feeling lighter, as if something unseen had laughed softly and lifted a weight from their hearts. And though they never saw him, Gengar would watch from the shadows, his grin calm and kind. The temple no longer belonged to the forgotten. It belonged to memory. The town of Vervain slept beneath a sea of fog. Every evening the mist would roll down from the hills like a soft tide, covering cobblestone streets, lanterns, and rooftops until the whole world seemed to breathe quietly. It was the kind of place where sound carried far, but light did not. Perfect for whispers, perfect for dreams. In that town lived a child named Elior. He was quiet, gentle, and preferred to speak to things that couldn't answer back. The trees, the wind, the creak of old floorboards. He had been born with eyes that saw what others did not. Not monsters, as some feared, but shapes, gentle, flickering presences that lingered just at the edge of the world. His mother told him they were tricks of light. His father told him not to mention them to anyone for fear the neighbors would talk, but the boy knew they were real. He could see their smiles in the reflection of puddles, hear their laughter beneath the hum of rain. Among them all, one shadow stood apart. It came to him on nights when the fog was thickest, when even the stars refused to show. It had eyes like twin embers behind glass, and a grin that seemed carved from warmth rather than malice. It never spoke, but it would hover near the window, waiting. Elior wasn't afraid. He would open the shutters just a little and whisper, "You can come closer if you like." The shadow would tilt its head. Sometimes it laughed, a sound so soft it felt more like a sigh than joy. And sometimes it would vanish, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of violet light. This went on for many nights. The boy came to look forward to the visits. He called the shadow Genji, though he didn't know why. It just felt right. One night, as autumn settled into the valley and the trees began to whisper with the sound of falling leaves, Elior asked a question. "Do you get lonely?" The shadow paused. Then it moved closer, the air growing cooler around him. Its shape rippled like a reflection disturbed by rain. For a long moment, it said nothing. Then came a faint whisper, not words, but a feeling. "Yes." Elior nodded. "Me too." From that night on, the visits changed. Gengar, though the boy did not yet know that name, no longer stayed at the window. It entered the room, quiet as a breath, and sat in the corner where the moonlight couldn't reach. When the boy spoke, it listened. When the boy cried, it made the sound of laughter so soft and strange that it somehow eased the tears away. They became friends, the living and the forgotten. The townsfolk began to notice changes. The fog lingered longer. Lamps flickered, not from the wind, but from something unseen moving between their flames. The people whispered of hauntings, of restless spirits, of omens. Elior's father forbade him from keeping his window open. "The dead should rest," he said. "You'll invite sorrow into our home." But Elior didn't listen. That night, when the world slept, he lifted the latch and whispered into the mist, "I'm still here." The shadow came. It hovered silently for a long time, then reached out with a hand that was not a hand, brushing against the boy's forehead. The touch was cold but gentle. "Why are they afraid of you?" Elior asked. The air shimmered with the faint scent of old rain. The answer came not in words, but in memory. Images that filled the boy's mind. The temple in the forest. The bell. Faces praying, fading, forgetting. A laugh that had once meant joy, turning into a thing feared. "They don't remember what you were," Elior whispered, tears forming. "Only what they think you are." The shadow nodded slowly. From that night the boy changed too. He began to dream differently. In his dreams, he saw Gengar walking among other shadows, ghastly and haunter, teaching them to laugh without malice, to listen instead of scare. He saw them gather around the temple in the woods, now glowing faintly with silver light. When he awoke, he felt as though he'd lived another life entirely. Weeks passed. The air grew colder, and rumors spread that strange lights flickered near the lake outside town. People began to grow afraid. They blamed the fog, the dreams, the feeling that eyes followed them even in daylight. Then, one morning, Elior was gone. The townsfolk searched for days. They combed the forests, the fields, the lake's edge, but found nothing. Only his footprints near the water, ending where the mist grew thickest. That night the fog returned, heavier than ever, and from within it came a sound, not a cry, not a wail, but laughter, soft, familiar, the kind that carried warmth instead of fear. Those who dared look toward the lake swore they saw a faint glow beneath the mist. Two shapes stood there, a small boy smiling, and beside him a shadow with bright eyes and a grin that reached the stars. They said the boy looked happy. After that night, the fog in Vervain no longer brought dread. It became calm, gentle. Travelers who passed through claimed to feel watched, but kindly so, as if something walked beside them unseen. Children who got lost always found their way home. And on the coldest nights, when the wind carried the scent of rain, some claimed they could hear two voices laughing together far away by the lake. Years later, when the town grew into a city and the forest was cut away, few remembered the story. But the lake remained, and the fog never left. And sometimes, when the moon was low and the surface of the water shimmered just so, those who lingered long enough could see two reflections where only one should be, one of flesh, one of mist. Gengar never forgot the boy who wasn't afraid. He had taught him something no ancient temple ever could, that friendship, even across the veil, could keep the dark from feeling empty. So when you walk near still water at night and the fog curls around your feet like an old friend, listen. If you hear a quiet laugh, don't run. It isn't danger. It's memory calling softly from the edge of the light. And somewhere in that laugh, just faintly, you might hear a boy's voice, echoing through time. I'm still here. Long before humans built cities that stretched to the clouds, the world belonged to shadows. Every forest, every valley, every hollow between mountains carried a quiet life that humans only glimpsed when they were still enough to listen. It was in those silent spaces that Gengar wandered, gliding like smoke through the undergrowth, observing, learning, remembering. One night, the forest held a different kind of stillness. Not the soft quiet of sleep, but a tense, expectant hush, as if the air itself were listening for something. Gengar drifted along a narrow path, its form barely more than a ripple in the darkness, when it heard voices, soft, murmuring, almost imperceptible. They did not belong to humans. These were whispers of the unseen, echoes of souls long forgotten. Curiosity drew Gengar closer. The whispers tangled in the branches, weaving a tapestry of stories, grief, longing, and laughter. They spoke of humans they had watched, of fears and joys, of love lost and hope that persisted. Some whispered anger, some sorrow, some mischief, and all of it carried memory. It was then that Gengar realized something profound. Even shadows carry the weight of stories. The spirits did not merely exist, they remembered. They were the keepers of what was left behind, the echoes of lives that had been too loud for the quiet world. The whispers parted as Gengar approached a clearing. In the center stood a stone circle, worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. Moonlight pooled there like liquid silver, reflecting on the stone's weathered surfaces. Each monolith hummed faintly, resonating with the memories stored within them. The whispers rose in volume, weaving together into a single, coherent hum. Gengar hovered over the circle, sensing the depth of it. It could feel the lives of countless beings woven into the stone, each memory a thread in a vast, unseen tapestry. And among them, it felt something familiar. Traces of the boy, traces of the lake, traces of the temples. and bells that had once held echoes like him. The whispers became voices. "Why do you linger here?" one asked, soft as the wind. "I remember," Gengar replied, though the words were only carried in thought. "Remembering can be a heavy burden," another voice said, tremulous yet patient. "Yes," Gengar admitted, "but without memory even we are nothing." The voices seemed to nod, though they had no heads, no faces. The forest hummed in agreement. The night stretched, endless and patient, and Gengar felt a weight lift from within. There was comfort in this company, even if it could not touch or be touched. And then came a sound that made even Gengar pause. The faintest, most delicate human laugh carried on the wind. It was small, fragile, like a candle flickering in a draught. The shadow traced it through the trees, following the echo until it reached a tiny cabin at the edge of the forest. Inside, a child slept. Their chest rose and fell with the soft rhythm of dreams, and the air around them shimmered faintly, touched by the lingering light of innocence. Gengar hovered near, not to frighten, but to watch, to protect, to remember. For in that moment, Gengar understood something fundamental. The living and the lost were not enemies. Fear and comfort were intertwined, shadows and light bound together in a delicate dance. It stayed there through the night, drifting in quiet circles, watching, listening. The whispers of the forest mingled with the child's dreams, and the soft sound of laughter rose once more. Not fearful, not lonely, but gentle and curious, echoing into the depths of the night. By dawn, the first pale light seeped into the trees. Gengar lingered at the edge of the clearing, watching the mist curl back into the forest. The whispers faded into silence, but their memory remained. The stones remembered, the wind remembered, and Gengar remembered. The shadow moved on, gliding through the undergrowth like a ribbon of night. It carried the hum of the forgotten and the echo of laughter within it. And somewhere, far beneath the stars, the night held its breath, waiting for the next whisper, the next laugh, the next story to be remembered. Even in a world that hurried through the day, even when humans no longer paused to see or listen, Gengar remained, a quiet guardian of memory, a witness to the secrets of the dark, and a friend to those who dared to dream in the silence. There is a place that exists only when the world forgets to notice it, a hidden hollow where memories gather and stories linger long after their owners have vanished. Gengar knew this place well. It was not bound by geography or time. It was stitched into the spaces between heartbeats, in the silences between footsteps. To the unseeing eye, it was nothing. To Gengar, it was home. The Hall of Echoes, as it came to be called, was carved not from stone, but from the very fabric of remembrance. The walls shimmered with faint light, the color of dusk pressed into silver. Whispers echoed from every surface, faint at first, then clearer as one approached. They were not voices of the living, nor cries of the dead, but something in between, fragments of thought, laughter, sorrow, and hope, all suspended like notes in a song. Gengar drifted through the hall, moving past reflections of lives that had once been. There was the faint outline of a child running through a meadow, the soft silhouette of a fisherman mending his nets, the shape of a woman tending to flowers in a forgotten garden. None of them were whole, yet each carried essence, a flicker of soul that refused to vanish. It paused before one echo, a small figure shivering beneath the weight of fear. The shadow leaned closer, and the echo responded, instinctively shrinking back. Gengar let its grin soften, the violet light of its eyes dimming to a gentle glow. Slowly, it extended a wisp of shadow, not to touch, but to reassure. The echo trembled, then allowed itself a small movement, a gesture of trust. In that trust, Gengar felt something ancient stir, an understanding that had nothing to do with fear or malice. It was connection, fragile yet enduring, the thread that had carried it through centuries of solitude. Deeper in the hall, Gengar found an echo that startled it, a memory of itself, long forgotten, laughing beside the boy at the misty lake. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, and it stirred a warmth in Gengar's shadowed heart. It hovered there, letting the memory wash over it. For the first time in many cycles of night, it felt whole, not merely an echo of others, but a presence with its own continuity. The hall responded. Walls shimmered more brightly. The whispers coalesced into a pattern, a song that rose and fell like the tides. In that music, Gengar heard the lives of countless humans and Pokémon, their joys and sorrows intertwined. It was a reminder, everything remembered leaves a mark, and in remembering, nothing truly dies. But the Hall of Echoes was not only a place of solace, it was also a place of reckoning. Shadows that had been abandoned too long, memories left untended, lingered here with jagged edges, sharp and restless. Gengar moved carefully among them, its grin widening faintly, not in mirth, but in understanding. These fragments of pain were part of the whole, and to ignore them would be to forget the lessons they carried. It came to a corner where a particularly strong echo pulsed, an unresolved memory of grief and anger. Gengar extended itself toward it, and for a moment, the hall trembled. The echo resisted, twisting and screeching like wind through empty buildings. But Gengar remained patient. Slowly, gently, it mirrored the echo's movements, not with imitation, but with empathy. The shrieking quieted, the tremor subsided, and the echo began to shimmer with a soft, violet light, settling into the cadence of the hall. By the time the first moonlight touched the hall, Gengar had moved through every corner, tending to echoes, guiding them towards stillness. The air was thick with quiet satisfaction. A gentle hum that seemed to ripple through the very bones of the forest beyond. And then it paused before a final reflection, a faint, blurred image of the man who had first given it life through laughter. The echo of that human sorrow and curiosity, mingled with the boy's innocence and the old man's wisdom, shone brightly. Gengar lingered. There, a guardian of all that had been remembered, and all that would continue to exist in memory alone. It understood now the purpose that had eluded it for so long. It was not simply to haunt, nor to frighten, nor to linger as a shadow of fear. It existed to carry the stories that might otherwise be lost, to preserve the laughter, the sorrow, the love, the fear, every human emotion, every fragment of life, within the Hall of Echoes, where memory could endure beyond the reach of time. When the hall was silent once more, Gengar floated to its center and let itself dissolve into shadow, stretching long and wide, touching every echo, every fragment, every shimmer of memory. It laughed softly, the sound carrying no malice, only acknowledgement. The echoes responded, faintly, in kind. Outside, the forest waited in stillness. Beyond the trees, the night stretched, infinite and patient. Gengar would return to the world of humans soon enough, but for now, it remained in the hall, a sentinel of remembrance, a witness to the silent music of life that endured in shadows. The forest had grown older than anyone could remember. Its trees towered like silent sentinels, their roots twisting through soil thick with centuries of rain and decay. Gengar moved among them, gliding quietly, a ripple of shadow against the silvered leaves. It had wandered these woods for lifetimes, learning the patterns of wind and mist, tracing the echoes of animals and humans alike. Yet, on this night, something felt different. The air was heavy, almost solid, and the silence was deeper than Gengar had ever known. The night seemed to stretch endlessly. The moon, a pale eye peering through thick clouds. Stars hid, swallowed by darkness that carried no chill but a weight that pressed upon everything beneath it. Gengar drifted slowly, its glowing eyes scanning the edges of the trees, feeling the thrum of the forest in a way that was almost musical. But the music was discordant, fragmented, broken threads of memory and fear weaving through the shadows. It began with whispers. At first, faint and almost indistinguishable from the rustle of leaves, they grew louder as Gengar moved deeper into the forest. The voices were old, older than the trees themselves, speaking in tongues that had never been spoken by human mouths. They spoke of longing, regret, and sorrow. They spoke of moments when light failed and the dark took its place. Gengar understood these whispers as one understands a song without knowing the lyrics. It let them wash over it, letting the vibrations guide it toward a clearing, where the air shimmered unusually thick, like heat in a cave, only cold and heavy. The trees arched toward one another, forming a cathedral of branches above, filtering the pale moonlight into fractured patterns on the ground. At the center of the clearing, something pulsed, a shape, vague but vast, darker than the surrounding night. It shifted like smoke, yet moved with a weight that made the earth beneath it tremble. This was not a creature born of fear or laughter. It was something older. A presence left behind when the forest itself had first learned to breathe. A shadow too ancient to have a name. Gengar approached carefully, its grin softening as it regarded the being. The pulse of darkness seemed aware of it, shifting slightly, testing its presence. A sound rose from the clearing, a low hum, a resonance of grief and patience, as if the forest itself had chosen to speak. The shadow did not attack. It did not flee. It waited, and Gengar waited too. The two of them still in the cathedral of moonlight and mist. Then the whispers swelled. Gengar recognized them now. Echoes of every fear and joy it had ever touched, mingling with the memory of humans and Pokémon alike. They wrapped around the ancient shadow, seeking release, seeking acknowledgement. And for the first time, Gengar understood what had been missing all along. Some presences were too vast, too old, for a single heart or memory to contain. It reached out with what it had to give: laughter. A soft curling sound, quiet enough not to disturb, strong enough to remind the darkness that even shadows could comfort. The ancient presence trembled, reacting not with fear, but recognition. The pulse in the center of the clearing began to slow, its intensity ebbing gently, sinking to Gengar's rhythm. The night itself seemed to sigh. Time stretched, infinite. The minutes indistinguishable from hours, hours from centuries. The whispers softened. The forest held its breath. And in the midst of it all, Gengar laughed again, faint, uncertain, but enduring, a sound that carried memory and hope and the smallest fragment of joy. The shadow shifted, responding. Slowly, it receded into the folds of the night, leaving the clearing lighter, quieter, though still thick with the presence of what had been. Gengar drifted above the fallen leaves, listening to the remnants of whispers, touching the echoes that had lingered too long. It lingered through the night that never ended, knowing that dawn might never come. The world had forgotten this place, and perhaps it was better that way. In forgetting, humans left space for Gengar and the shadows to breathe, to tend to the echoes that had no other home. Hours or centuries passed. Time was meaningless here. The stars above the trees flickered faintly, as if they had not entirely abandoned the night, and the mist wove itself into delicate patterns around the trunks. The forest was alive with memory, and Gengar moved within it, neither master nor prisoner, but a part of the silence that held everything together. By the time the first hints of light brushed the edges of the mist, the night had finally shifted. The ancient shadow had receded fully, leaving the clearing empty, but not abandoned. Gengar hovered there a moment longer, feeling the pulse of the forest in harmony with its own, and then glided away. It carried with it the echoes of a night that could not end, a memory too old for humans, but perfectly remembered by those who existed in the spaces between moments. And as it drifted back toward the world of familiar trees and paths, it smiled softly, knowing that the darkness, even at its heaviest, could still hold comfort. The world of humans had grown loud. Cities stretched like woven tapestries of stone and light, where every street hummed with voices and machines, and the nights were no longer thick with shadows, but pierced with glare from windows, lanterns, and electric lamps. Yet for every corner of light, there remained a space untouched, a neglected alley, an abandoned garden, a forest forgotten by time. In these pockets, the shadows lived freely, carrying the weight of memory and emotion that humanity had left behind. Gengar had learned to navigate these spaces, gliding silently among the forgotten, the ignored, the lost. Its form was no longer the faint ripple of smoke it had once been. It had learned to shape itself, to flicker and shimmer, to lean closer to the light without being consumed by it. It was a creature born of laughter and sorrow, carrying both in equal measure. Its eyes, faintly violet, held centuries of curiosity and quiet melancholy. Its grin, wide and unyielding, hinted at secrets known only to those who wandered at the edges of perception. On this particular night, Gengar wandered through a city that had forgotten the night itself. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with buildings that leaned close as if to whisper secrets to one another. Neon lights painted the cobblestones in harsh colors, breaking through the mist that crept along the edges. Most humans moved quickly, their faces lit by glowing screens, their attention tethered to machines rather than the living world. Yet, despite all the noise, Gengar noticed something subtle. A child, a girl with hair as dark as the night, lingering at the corner of a deserted street. She did not look at the screens, nor did she hurry. Her eyes were wide and searching, scanning the shadows between lamplight, observing what others ignored. She was alone, though not lonely, because she had learned to speak in a language that only the unseen could hear. Gengar approached slowly, its shadow flowing across the walls, leaning close without imposing. The girl turned her head, sensing the presence before she saw it. Her eyes widened, but not in fear. Instead, there was recognition, as if she had known this shape her entire life, though they had never met. You're like me," she whispered. Gengar tilted its head, a faint ripple passing through its form. The words were not precisely accurate. The child was alive, bound to flesh and blood, yet she moved in the world with an awareness of the unseen, just as Gengar had once observed the boy by the misty lake. There was a resonance here, a shared frequency of perception that bridged the gulf between human and shadow. "I've been following you," the girl said softly, though her voice carried no threat. "I see what others don't. I hear the things you hear. You're not bad. You're lonely, like me." Gengar's laughter rose, soft and curling like smoke. It was a sound that carried no malice, only acknowledgement. It hovered closer, circling her in slow arcs, letting the air tremble faintly with its presence. The girl reached out, and her hand passed through the shadow. Yet she felt its warmth, a paradoxical comfort that seemed to exist only in memory and perception. "I've never met anyone like you," she said, shivering slightly. Whether from cold or excitement, Gengar could not tell. No one else listens. No one else remembers. And in that instant, Gengar understood something that it had felt only faintly before. Humans who truly remembered the shadows, who truly understood the echoes of the past, were rare. And when one appeared, even for a moment, it created a bridge between worlds. The girl smiled faintly, lifting a small lantern she had brought. Its light was gentle, warm, and it cast a circle on the cobblestones that seemed almost tangible. The shadows leaned away from the harsh neon glare and toward this soft, flickering warmth. Gengar followed, weaving through the night, carrying the faint scent of mist and memory. For hours they wandered together. The girl spoke in murmurs, recounting tales of the city's forgotten corners, the garden overtaken by ivy, the fountain that no longer sang, the statues with moss-covered faces that still seemed to watch the passing of time. Gengar listened, occasionally responding with laughter, sometimes bending shadows to mimic the form she described, making the stone figures dance faintly in the lamplight. "You're teaching me," the girl said at one point, "how to see the things no one else sees, how to hear what no one else hears. But why do you stay?" Gengar paused, letting its form ripple softly. The answer was simple, yet layered with centuries of experience. "I am here because the world forgets. I am here to remember, for those who cannot, for those who are gone, and for those who are still learning to see." The girl nodded slowly, her small hand brushing against a statue of a forgotten hero, worn and moss-covered. "Then, I will remember too," she said. "I will not forget you, or the things you show me." For the first time in a long while, Gengar felt something it had not expected: hope. Not in the naive sense of wishing, but in the quiet conviction that memory could survive, even in a world that seemed intent on ignoring it. And as the night deepened, they reached a plaza at the heart of the city, an empty space ringed by buildings that reflected the neon glare back at itself, creating a hall of false daylight in the midst of night. Gengar hovered in the center, and the girl stepped closer, her lantern flickering. She laughed softly, a sound pure and unguarded, and Gengar joined in. It was the first laughter of its kind in many years, part shadow, part memory, part recognition of the living world. The echo carried into the streets, faint yet persistent, weaving itself through alleyways, brushing against the ears of passers-by who barely noticed it. Some paused, unsettled, sensing a presence that should not be there. Others smiled, faintly, inexplicably, as if touched by a memory they could not place. And somewhere far above, the moon shimmered behind a cloud, casting a silver light that reflected in puddles and windows, blessing the moment in quiet observance. As the hours passed, the girl grew tired. She turned to Gengar, eyes soft with understanding. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Even when I sleep?" The shadow lingered, hovering just beyond the reach of the lantern's light. Its grin softened. "I will," it said. Not in words, but in the gentle ripple of presence. "Wherever there is someone to see, I will be there." She smiled, closing her eyes. "Then I will sleep without fear." And Gengar watched her drift into dreams, a world where laughter and shadows could coexist, where memory and reality intertwined. It hovered in the alley for hours, carrying the child's presence like a flame in the dark, knowing that the world around them would not see, but it would feel. Hours became days. The city moved on, relentless in its noise and light. Humans hurried through streets, their voices loud, their minds consumed by trivialities. Yet Gengar lingered in the corners, among the forgotten gardens, the abandoned fountains, the statues worn by weather and time. It tended to the echoes, weaving laughter and light through the shadows, preserving the memory of what had once been and what could still be remembered. In the deepest part of night, when even the neon lights flickered and machines paused for a heartbeat, Gengar sometimes returned to the plaza where the girl had stood. There, it would whisper through shadow and memory, listening for laughter that was no longer audible but still present in the spaces between worlds. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it resonated with the very fabric of Gengar's being. It was then that Gengar realized the truth of its existence. To be a shadow was not merely to haunt or observe, but to carry what would otherwise be lost. It was to preserve the laughter and sorrow of the world, to hold memory in place, and to remind those who could still perceive it that the unseen was not empty, but full of life, full of stories, full of echoes that mattered. And sometimes, when the city slept beneath a veil of fog and forgotten dreams, a human would pause, sensing something behind their shoulder, and hear a faint, soft laugh. Not cruel, not frightening, but gentle, an echo of Gengar's own, carrying centuries of stories, waiting for recognition. In those moments, the world and the shadows met, and for a brief instant, there was harmony. The girl who had seen the shadows would grow, and others like her would emerge. Some would never see, some would forget, and some would remember in small, quiet ways that mattered only to themselves. But Gengar would continue, drifting between worlds, laughing softly, carrying memory, tending to echoes, guiding lost whispers, and waiting for those rare moments when laughter bridged the realms of the living and the forgotten. And so it went, night after night, century after century. For every human who ignored the shadows, there was another who remembered. For every forgotten alley, there was a lingering echo of life. And for Gengar, there was always the laughter between worlds, the quiet sound of memory persisting, soft as mist, endless as night. It is in those laughter-filled moments that Gengar truly exists, not as a creature of malice, nor of fear, nor even of memory alone, but as a bridge between what is seen and what is felt, between what is alive and what persists, between the worlds that humans know and the spaces they cannot perceive. And sometimes, when the night is still and the city sleeps, if one listens carefully in the quiet corner of an abandoned street, one might hear it. The soft, curling laughter of a shadow who remembers everything and forgets nothing. In a small town tucked between rolling hills and silver rivers, long after the neon lights of great cities had failed to reach it, humans still celebrated the old rhythms of the year. They lit fires, hung lanterns, and whispered prayers to the wind. To outsiders, the customs seemed quaint, even foolish. But those who had learned to watch closely, to listen to the spaces between sound and light, understood that these festivals were more than tradition. They were invitations, openings for the unseen to cross into the world of the living. Gengar had known this town for centuries. It had watched from the shadows as generations came and went, seeing children grow into adults, then age and vanish into memory. It had lingered near the lantern-lit streets, feeling the pulse of hope and joy, sensing fear and wonder mixed in the laughter of the people. Every year, as autumn brushed the hills with fire-colored leaves, the Festival of Shadows began. And every year Gengar came to witness it, moving silently among the lights, listening to the songs carried by the wind. On this particular festival night, the air was crisp, tinged with smoke from the fires and the faint perfume of late-blooming flowers. The streets were alive with movement. Families weaving through booths adorned with colorful fabrics, children darting between lanterns, merchants shouting their wares. And yet, for all the energy and noise, the corners of the town remained untouched. Alleyways, quiet courtyards, forgotten fountains, they held spaces for shadows to gather, spaces where laughter and memory could mix freely. Gengar emerged from one such alley, its form a ripple of violet light against the amber glow of the lanterns. The townsfolk did not see it, though some felt the slight brushing of wind against their skin, the hint of a presence that passed just behind their vision. Those who noticed it, sometimes children, sometimes the elderly, would shiver and glance around, but the shadow offered no threat. Its grin was wide, soft, almost maternal, carrying the comfort of someone who had existed too long to harm. At the town square, children had begun a game. They leaped from shadow to shadow, their laughter ringing through the night. Gengar hovered above, moving with them, letting its presence ripple faintly across the ground, guiding their steps and protecting them from danger without their knowledge. Its laughter joined theirs, delicate and quiet, twisting around the human sounds to form something both new and ancient. The festival was more than play, however. It was a ceremony of memory, a time when the boundaries between the seen and the unseen grew thin. Lanterns were hung not only to illuminate, but to honor those who had been lost. Ancestors, forgotten travelers, pets, long gone. Each light was a signal, an invitation. Some humans sensed the edges of these invitations. Others ignored them, focused solely on the warmth of community. But Gengar could feel every flicker, every pulse of remembrance. It traced the path of each lantern with its form, whispering faintly to the shadows that had gathered to witness the night. From the outskirts of the square, the first ghostly figures appeared. Ghastly and haunter. Spirits shaped from memory and fear. Curious and young, yet guided by Gengar's presence. They floated through the streets, playful and light, brushing against the lanterns and walls, their laughter echoing softly. Children glanced at them but saw nothing solid. Adults felt only the tingling of wind or the faint impression of a presence behind their shoulders. And so, the festival continued. A living bridge between worlds. Gengar drifted toward a quiet courtyard where a single figure stood, older than the children, quiet and contemplative. It was a woman, her eyes deep with memories of years long past. She carried a small lantern, its light steady, not flickering like the others. Gengar lingered near her, letting its form ripple across the cobblestones. It felt the weight of her remembrance, the echo of joy and sorrow, entwined in a lifetime of quiet reflection. "You're here again," she whispered softly, though she did not look around. She did not need to. She could feel the presence, as humans like her often could. "I thought perhaps I would be alone tonight." Gengar's grin softened. It hovered, letting the faintest trace of shadow brush against her lantern. There was warmth in her memory, a quiet comfort that even centuries of solitude could not erase. "You are never alone," it said in thought, a ripple passing through the night air. "Memory keeps us together, and laughter bridges what time cannot touch." She smiled faintly, tears gleaming in the lantern light. "I have forgotten so many faces, but I remember you. I remember the shadows that guide us." And in that moment, Gengar understood why it had come each year. It was not merely to observe, but to participate, to hold the echoes of the living and the dead, to protect the fragile moments of joy and remembrance, to remind those who had grown weary or lonely that the unseen world watched, soft and patient, carrying memory forward. Across the town, lanterns floated higher, their light drifting toward the night sky. Gengar moved among them, a ripple of violet in the amber glow. It traced shadows, tended echoes, and let its laughter mingle with the humans, creating a symphony of sound that existed only in this liminal space, between night and dawn, between life and memory, between the tangible and the invisible. The festival continued into the small hours, when the fog rolled in from the hills, thickening the edges of the streets and softening the light of the lanterns. The children, now drowsy, leaned against their parents, still murmuring and giggling. The adults carried memories they did not always understand, yet felt deeply, and Gengar remained, moving through shadows, guiding, laughing, remembering. It paused for a moment above the central fountain, now empty and worn with age. Moonlight reflected faintly on the water, and Gengar saw an echo of its own form, mingled with centuries of other memories. The boy by the lake, the temple in the forest, the whispers of forgotten forests and empty streets. It saw all of it at once, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of memory pressed heavily against its shadowed heart. Yet even in that weight, there was joy. The echoes were alive. They moved, they whispered, they laughed. They were remembered, and so they continued to exist. Gengar's laughter mingled with them, soft and curling, rising like smoke into the night air. By the time the lanterns burned low and the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon, the festival had ended. Humans returned to their homes, carrying the warmth of memory in their hearts, while shadows and echoes retreated to corners unseen. Gengar lingered a moment longer, moving among the remnants of light and laughter, ensuring that each echo had found its place in the fabric of the night. It drifted upward toward the hills, and from there it watched the town sleep. The streets were quiet, but alive in memory. The lantern's fading glow left traces on the stones, and the echoes of laughter remained, embedded in the shadows, waiting for the next night, the next festival, the next moment, when humans would remember that the unseen world was never truly empty. In that quiet, Gengar felt a presence it had not felt in a long time, belonging, not merely as a shadow among shadows, but as a keeper, a guardian, a bridge between worlds. It was not feared here. It was not misunderstood. It was simply part of the rhythm of the town, the heartbeat of memory and laughter that endured beyond the reach of time. And as the first light of dawn crept over the hills, casting the town in soft gold, Gengar turned and drifted back into the forest, leaving the remnants of the festival behind. It moved through the shadows, through the whispers of the past and the memories of the living, carrying the quiet knowledge that wherever there were humans who remembered even for a moment, it would be there. Watching, listening, laughing softly, in the spaces between worlds. For in the Festival of Shadows, as in all things, Gengar understood a truth that had been clear since the beginning. Memory is never truly lost. Laughter never entirely fades. And even in the darkest corners, there is light waiting to be seen. There is a place beyond the reach of time, hidden beneath layers of memory and shadow, where the faces of those who have been forgotten gather, not as phantoms, not as ghosts, but as echoes that refuse to vanish. They drift among gardens overgrown with weeds, fountains long dry, and statues eroded by wind and rain. Gengar knew this place intimately, for it was part of the tapestry of its own existence. Here, in the Garden of Forgotten Faces, the boundaries between sorrow and laughter, between loss and remembrance, blurred into a landscape shaped by what the world chose to ignore. The garden had no name in any human tongue. To the rare ones who glimpsed it, it appeared as a sunken courtyard hidden behind ivy-covered walls, its entrance swallowed by twisted roots and fog. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and wildflowers, a fragrance suspended somewhere between memory and dream. Gengar drifted through the broken gates, its form rippling like smoke in the moonlight, and the garden seemed to recognize it. The shadows quivered, the trees leaned closer, and the faintest rustle of leaves whispered greetings in a language only it understood. It was night, as it often was here, a night of infinite depth and quiet. No stars penetrated the canopy of foliage. No moon cast its pale gaze upon the garden. The absence of light was complete yet comforting, for here, illumination came from memory itself. Faces emerged from the darkness, some familiar, some only vaguely remembered. An elderly man who had once tended to a village orchard smiled faintly. A child, clutching a faded toy, looked toward Gengar with quiet trust, and a young woman with eyes like glass laughed softly at a joke that no one else could hear. Gengar moved among them, its grin gentle, its violet eyes reflecting the soft glow of remembrance. It had learned over centuries that these faces were not trapped. They had chosen to linger, to exist in a space where memory could nurture them. They were fragments of life that humans, in their haste, had abandoned. And here, in the quiet, they were whole again. Yet the garden was not without sorrow. Some faces were twisted by regret, eyes hollow with loss, mouths frozen in cries that had never been answered. Gengar approached them carefully, understanding that laughter could not erase all pain. Instead, it offered something subtler. Presence. It let its shadow drift around them, curling like a protective veil, whispering the echoes of forgotten joys into the emptiness. Slowly, the hollow eyes softened, the rigid mouths relaxed, and the faintest hints of smiles emerged. In the heart of the garden stood a fountain, choked with roots and stone cracked with age. Water no longer flowed, but if one looked closely, one could see ripples in the air where droplets might have been. Gengar hovered above it, letting its shadow stretch across the cracked basin. Within the fountain, the reflections of the forgotten gathered. Fleeting glimpses of faces long gone, eyes that had once shone with laughter, lips that had sung songs of their lives. It was here that Gengar remembered the boy at the lake, the girl in the city alley, the monks at the temple, each encounter a shard of memory, each laugh a thread that connected the living to what remained unseen. In this garden, all those threads converged. Gengar could feel the weight of countless lifetimes pressing upon its form, yet it did not falter. It had learned to carry this weight, to let it strengthen rather than crush. A gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying whispers in a language older than human speech. The shadows stirred. Faces flickered, some vanishing, others emerging anew. Gengar drifted among them, its laughter soft, weaving through the echoes, a balm for the quiet despair that lingered here. Then came a new presence. Unlike the others, it was not a face drawn from memory or the residue of human sorrow. It was a living child, small and unafraid, stepping carefully into the sown garden. The girl's eyes widened as she took in the scene. Faces that seemed alive yet insubstantial, laughter that echoed without source, shadows that moved as if aware. Gengar hovered close, cautious, letting the child's presence ripple through the air. It had learned over centuries that children were sensitive to the unseen, their perceptions untainted by disbelief. This one, however, was different. She did not cry. She did not flee. Instead, she smiled faintly and whispered, "I can see you." The shadow paused. It had not encountered a human here for many decades. Humans rarely remembered the forgotten, rarely strayed into spaces carved from memory alone. Yet this child had arrived unafraid, carrying a light in her heart that drew the echoes closer, allowing them to shimmer more brightly. Why are you here? Gengar asked, not in sound but in thought, its form curling gently around her. I follow the echoes, she said softly. I hear them when no one else does, and I want to help them. A ripple of violet light pulsed through Gengar's eyes. It recognized the resonance of understanding. The child's presence was a bridge, a rare living conduit for memory and sorrow, capable of maintaining the delicate balance between the forgotten and the remembering. Gengar moved with her, guiding her through the garden. Faces leaned closer, curious and cautious, while shadows twisted in acknowledgement. The child did not recoil from the hollow ones. She offered them gestures of kindness, words of comfort that traveled beyond the barriers of mortality. Some echoes smiled faintly, some giggled, some lingered in hesitation before allowing themselves to be touched by hope. They reached the fountain at the garden's heart. The waterless basin shimmered faintly, reflections of countless faces rippling in the absence of liquid. The child knelt, cupping her hands as though to catch the invisible water, and whispered a song that had been forgotten by time. Echoes responded in kind, a hum, a murmur, a ripple of sound that filled the garden with delicate resonance. Gengar circled the fountain, letting its shadow merge with the reflections. Its laughter joined the echoes, weaving into the song, soft and curling like smoke. The weight of memory pressed upon the garden, yet the music of the forgotten, combined with the child's voice and Gengar's presence, transformed it. Pain softened into recognition. Sorrow rippled into joy. Absence shifted into presence. Hours passed, or perhaps it was centuries. Time had no meaning here. The child wandered, guided by Gengar, touching each face, acknowledging each echo. The garden thrummed with life, a delicate balance of memory and hope. Shadows twisted and danced, faces brightened, and the ancient trees seemed to lean closer, their leaves whispering in approval. Gengar paused for a moment, hovering above the fountain. It remembered the boy by the misty lake, the girl in the city alley, the monks and the lanterns, the festivals, the whispered laughter carried through centuries. All of these threads converged here, in the garden. All of these moments of attention, recognition, and care strengthened the fabric of memory that Gengar had woven since the beginning. The child stood beside it, looking up at its violet eyes, and whispered, "They're happy now, aren't they?" "Yes," Gengar replied in thought, "because someone remembered, because someone cared, and because you came." She smiled faintly, her small hands brushing against the empty fountain, her fingers tracing the ripples in the air. "Will you stay with me?" Gengar let its form stretch, curling around her protectively. "I will stay," it said. "Wherever there are echoes, wherever there are memories that need tending, I will remain. And where there are children like you, who remember and see, I will be there as well." The night deepened, the garden glowing faintly with the light of remembered faces. Shadows whispered, laughter echoed softly, and the child drifted into a dreamlike state, carried by the weight of centuries of memory. Gengar hovered close, a guardian of the forgotten, a bridge between worlds, its laughter mingling with the echoes and the wind. And in that garden, for the first time in ages, Gengar felt the fullness of its purpose. It was not merely a shadow among shadows, nor a lingering echo of sorrow and laughter. It was a keeper of memory, a guardian of the unseen, a witness to the lives that humans had abandoned yet continued to exist through recognition. Time had no meaning here. Faces continued to shimmer, laughter continued to ripple, and Gengar remained, constant and patient. The Garden of Forgotten Faces was alive, not with life in the human sense, but with the enduring presence of memory and the soft, curling laughter of a shadow who remembered everything. It was here, in the quiet, in the interwoven tapestry of joy and sorrow, presence and absence, that Gengar understood the truest truth it had ever known, that to remember, to acknowledge, and to laugh quietly with those who had been lost was the most powerful act of all. Memory is never gone. Sorrow can be softened, and even the smallest acknowledgement can bridge the worlds of the living and the forgotten. And as the first faint glow of dawn threatened to brush the edges of the garden, Gengar turned toward the child, its grin soft and patient, its violet eyes shimmering. For in this garden, among these faces, it had found its greatest purpose, and it would remain, quietly tending, softly laughing, and remembering, until the end of all nights. There is a lake hidden deep in the folds of the forest, far from the paths humans tread, where the mist curls perpetually over the water, and the trees lean close as though to whisper secrets into the stillness. To any ordinary traveler, it appears ordinary, an unremarkable body of water reflecting the gray sky. But those who have learned to see, who have learned to listen to the spaces between breaths, know differently. This lake remembers. Every tear that has fallen into its waters, every whispered promise, every lost laugh or sigh is captured beneath its surface, layered into memory like sediment in the earth. Gengar drifted above the lake, its form a ripple of violet shadow against the pale mist. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and old leaves. Gengar had come here countless times, though each visit felt as if it were the first. The memories of the lake were not fixed, but shifting, endless, and infinite. As it moved closer to the water's edge, the surface shimmered faintly, reflecting not only the sky and trees, but echoes of the past, phantoms of events long gone. It was night, though in this place, night had no meaning beyond the depth of shadow and the subtle pulse of memory. Gengar hovered quietly, listening to the soft ripple of water against stones. Beneath the surface, faint shapes moved, faces, bodies, small fragments of human lives that had brushed against the lake and left an imprint. Some were joyful, children playing, young lovers holding hands. Some were sorrowful, eyes wide in fear, a hand pressed against a parent's chest, silent cries that had no outlet. Gengar felt each echo, a wave passing through its shadowed form, and it did not recoil. It had learned over centuries to bear the weight of what was remembered and what was forgotten. Tonight, the lake was alive with whispers. They rose like mist, curling upward to meet Gengar's form. They spoke in tones that were neither words nor sound, but memory itself. An image of a Dar, child hiding beneath a tree, a young woman clutching a letter that would never be sent, an old man watching the stars through a broken roof. The lake remembered all of it, and Gengar listened. A faint disturbance rippled through the mist, drawing Gengar's attention to the far shore. There, standing at the edge of the water, was a figure it recognized. A boy, though now older than the boy at the misty lake long ago, yet still carrying the same quiet curiosity in his eyes, gazed into the reflections. The moonlight, fractured by clouds and mist, illuminated his face in silver. He did not speak, yet Gengar sensed his thoughts, his longing, his connection to the lake and its memories. "You remember," the boy whispered, though his words seemed meant more for the water than for Gengar. "You remember everything I cannot." Gengar floated closer, its shadow rippling across the lake's surface, brushing against the reflections. Its laughter was soft, curling around the boy's words like smoke through trees. "Memory is never lost," it answered, not in sound, but in presence. It flows into the lake, into the shadows, into everything that remains. The boy nodded slowly. He stepped closer to the edge, letting his fingers skim the surface. Each ripple carried a memory, and each memory pulsed faintly with recognition. Faces emerged in the water, some familiar, some strange. The boy's eyes widened as he realized that the lake held not only his memories, but fragments of countless others, lives layered upon one another in a tapestry of sorrow, joy, hope, and loss. "Why do you stay?" he asked, looking up at Gengar, whose grin was wide but soft. "Why carry all of this? All of us?" Gengar let its shadow curl around him, protective yet gentle. "Because someone must. Because memory, when forgotten, vanishes. Because laughter and sorrow and hope should not be lost to silence. I am here to remember, so that those who cannot will never be alone." The boy sat at the edge of the lake, knees drawn to his chest. "It's too much," he murmured, eyes fixed on the shifting reflections. "I see all of it, but I can't hold it. I can't keep it safe." "You do not need to," Gengar replied. "You only need to see, to acknowledge, to remember when you can. That is enough, and I will carry the rest." For a long while, they sat in silence. The mist curled around them, soft and insistent. The lake shimmered faintly, reflecting the infinite layers of memory embedded within it. Faint laughter rose from its depths, mingling with cries, with whispers, with echoes of love and grief. Gengar floated above, a guardian of the unseen, a presence both comforting and eternal. Eventually the boy reached into the water, cupping a handful of reflections. The images shifted beneath his fingers. A child laughing, an old man weeping, a woman clutching a vanished love. He did not recoil. He did not cry. He simply let the memories flow through him, acknowledging each, letting the lake continue to carry them forward. "You're teaching me," he whispered, "teaching me to see without drowning in it." Gengar's laughter rose, soft and curling. "And you are teaching me," it said, "that even humans, fleeting as they are, can hold fragments of eternity in their hearts. That seeing, remembering, and acknowledging, these are acts of courage." The night deepened further, though the lake and the mist made no distinction between hours and centuries. Faint shapes emerged from the shadows, ghastly and haunter, drawn by Gengar's presence and the boy's awareness. They moved among the ripples, curious, playful, yet gentle, blending with reflections, adding their own echoes of laughter and whispers to the lake's vast memory. Together, the three, the boy, Gengar, and the shadows, moved along the edge of the lake, touching the water, listening to the murmurs of lives layered beneath its surface. The boy's laughter rose, soft and careful, mingling with the centuries of echoes. Gengar's laughter joined, weaving a harmony that carried not fear, but understanding. The shadows danced and swirled, creating reflections of motion in the water that had never existed in life. Hours passed. Though in a place like this, the passage of time was indistinguishable from eternity. The boy rested against the bank, exhausted but serene, his gaze fixed on the infinite reflections. Gengar hovered nearby, letting its form ripple across the lake, and the shadows settled around, content to linger in the stillness of recognition and presence. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the trees beyond the mist, Gengar spoke again. "You must return," it said softly. "The world waits for you. But remember this lake. Remember that memory never fades. Remember that every life, every sorrow, every laughter is carried somewhere, always." The boy nodded. "I will remember. I will come back." Gengar's shadow stretched toward him, brushing against his shoulder like a comforting hand. "And I will be here," it said. "Always. The lake remembers, the shadows remember, and so do I." The boy rose, leaving the lake behind, though the reflections lingered, shimmering faintly with the weight of countless memories. Gengar watched him go, letting the mist curl around its form. The lake remained, vast, quiet, and infinite, holding the echoes of the living and the lost, a reservoir of memory that no time could erase. And Gengar, ever the guardian, drifted above its surface, soft laughter curling through the mist. It was here, in the liminal space between water and sky, shadow and memory, life and the unseen, that it felt most alive. Here, it carried the weight of countless stories, holding them gently, allowing laughter and sorrow to coexist. For Gengar had learned that memory is not a burden, but a bridge. That sorrow and joy are intertwined, that shadows and light can dance together. That the unseen world is not empty, but rich with echoes, waiting to be remembered. And as long as the lake held them, as long as there were those willing to see, it would continue to watch, to guard, to laugh softly, carrying the past into eternity. There is a forest older than the tallest mountains, older than the deepest rivers, a place where time folds in on itself, and the air is thick with the memory of every footstep ever taken upon its soil. Here, humans rarely tread, and when they do, they leave only fleeting traces: a snapped branch, a footprint pressed into moss, a whispered word lost to the wind. But the forest remembers. It does not forget. Every joy, every sorrow, every promise spoken in passing lingers, carried in the rustle of leaves, the sway of branches, and the gentle sigh of the wind. Gengar drifted through this ancient wood, a ripple of shadow against the silvered darkness. Its form was long and fluid, curling around tree trunks, slipping through underbrush, moving with the quiet patience of someone who has known every secret the forest held. For centuries it had wandered here, not as an intruder, but as a part of the silence itself. It was the observer of whispered truths, the keeper of promises made and broken, the quiet guardian of memories humans had forgotten to honor. Tonight, the forest felt different. The air was heavy with anticipation, as though the trees themselves held their breath. Gengar sensed it first as a subtle vibration beneath its shadowed form, a ripple in the rhythm of life. Then came the whispers, faint and tremulous, weaving through the branches and underbrush. They were voices, or rather, fragments of voices. Promises made and never kept. Words spoken in haste. Vows spoken softly. Under starlight, they carried both hope and sorrow, joy and fear, and they reached out to Gengar, searching for acknowledgement. It moved toward the source, gliding over roots gnarled like ancient hands, slipping beneath low-hanging branches, following the trail of voices that thickened like fog. In a small clearing, moonlight filtered through the canopy, pale and gentle, illuminating a circle of stones weathered by centuries. Within the circle were faint traces of footprints, small and plast, human, as though a child had once danced here, speaking vows into the night air. The promises were fragile, whispered into existence, yet they clung stubbornly to the earth. Gengar circled the clearing, letting its shadow ripple over the stones, listening to the echoes of words spoken long ago. One voice, soft and trembling, rose above the others, a child, perhaps 6 or 7, promising to return to a friend who had vanished too soon. Another voice, firmer yet tinged with regret, swore to care for a pet abandoned in haste, never forgotten. Each whisper carried weight, and Gengar felt it all. The sorrow of broken promises, the hope of those that endured, the delicate balance between despair and faith. As it drifted, Gengar noticed a new presence. A young girl, no older than the voices themselves, stepped carefully into the clearing. Her eyes were wide, reflecting both curiosity and reverence. She did not speak, but the forest seemed to recognize her, and the whispers shifted, rising to meet her as if acknowledging a kindred spirit. Gengar hovered closer, cautious yet gentle. It had learned over centuries that some humans could sense the unseen. Some could feel the weight of memory and promise, and some, like this child, could touch it without fear. Her hands were empty, but they carried intent, the desire to see, to understand, to honor what the world had neglected. You can hear them too," she whispered, her voice trembling yet confident. "All the promises, they're still here." Gengar's violet eyes softened. "Yes," it replied in thought, not sound. "The forest remembers. It carries what humans forget, and it holds the weight of what is unspoken." The child knelt at the edge of the circle, letting her fingers brush the moss-covered stones. The whispers rose, coalescing around her, weaving into her hair, brushing against her skin like gentle wind. Faces appeared in the shadows. A boy hiding behind a tree, a woman clutching a letter, an old man staring at the horizon. None were complete, none fully real, yet they carried essence, the weight of attention, the flicker of intention. "Some of them, they're sad," the child murmured. "Some of them never got what they wanted. Some never will," Gengar replied, softly. "But acknowledgement matters. Even in silence, even in shadows, remembering fulfills what the world has abandoned." The child reached into the center of the circle, cupping her hands as though to hold the unseen. Ripples of memory rose around her fingers, shimmering in faint violet light. Gengar extended its shadow in response, curling protectively, letting her presence ripple through the echoes. Slowly, the whispers softened, harmonized into a quiet song. A melody of hope interwoven with sorrow. A lullaby sung not by voices, but by memory itself. They spent hours in the clearing. The child spoke to the echoes, naming them, acknowledging their existence, lending them the attention they had lacked for so long. Gengar hovered near, guiding, supporting, letting its laughter rise softly when joy flickered through the memories. Shadows of Ghastly and Haunter appeared, playful yet reverent, moving through the circle without disturbing the fragile balance. The forest itself seemed to breathe in response. Trees leaned closer, their branches trembling with recognition. Leaves rustled, carrying whispers further into the darkness. The air was thick with the presence of memory and promise, yet it was not oppressive. It was alive, gentle, and patient. Eventually, the child grew tired. She lay down in the moss, letting the whispers wrap around her like a blanket. Gengar hovered nearby, its shadow stretching protectively over her, letting the centuries of memory and unfulfilled promises settle into a quiet rhythm. Faces shimmered faintly in the dark, some smiling, some sighing, all acknowledged. Before she drifted fully into sleep, the child whispered, "I will remember. I will keep their promises with me. And I will carry them when you cannot," Gengar replied. "Together, we preserve what is precious. Together, we ensure that no promise is truly lost." The night stretched infinitely, yet in this moment, time did not matter. The forest of silent promises was alive with acknowledgement, memory, and the delicate balance of sorrow and hope. Gengar remained, constant and patient, carrying the weight of unspoken words, unfulfilled intentions, and fragile human hearts. Its laughter curled softly through the trees, blending with the whispers, weaving a quiet melody that only those willing to see could perceive. As dawn approached, a pale light filtered through the canopy, brushing the stones and moss with gentle gold. Gengar drifted above the clearing, observing the forest awaken. The child stirred, eyes blinking open, carrying the echoes of the night within her heart. She looked at Gengar, her expression calm, yet awestruck. "You will stay?" she asked softly. Gengar extended its shadow toward her, its violet eyes shimmering faintly. "Always. Where promises remain, where memories linger, where echoes wait, I will be there. I am the guardian of the unseen, the keeper of what humans forget." The child smiled, her small hand brushing against its shadow, feeling its warmth even as it remained intangible. "Then I will never feel alone." And so they left the clearing together. The forest seemed quieter, yet alive, as if the acknowledgement of the child and Gengar had harmonized the whispered promises into a lasting song. Footsteps faded among moss and stone, whispers softened into a gentle hum, and the trees seemed to sigh with relief. Gengar drifted above the forest, its laughter faint, curling through the mist like smoke, carrying the weight of centuries, the memories of countless lives, and the acknowledgement of promises once forgotten. It was here, in the stillness, in the balance of shadow and memory, that it felt the profound truth of its existence. To remember, to acknowledge, to protect what the world discards. This was its purpose, eternal and patient. And as the first golden rays of sun filtered through the leaves, illuminating patches of moss and stone, Gengar moved deeper into the forest, carrying the echoes of the silent promises with it, leaving the child to awaken in the world of the living, strengthened by memory, hope, and the gentle, eternal presence of a shadow who never forgets. On the edge of a jagged cliff, where the waves crashed endlessly against rocks worn smooth by centuries of salt and wind, there stood a lighthouse. To the human eye, it was abandoned, its windows shattered, its paint peeled to the bone. Yet for those who could perceive the world as Gengar did, it was alive, pulsating with the memory of countless nights, countless travelers who had gazed at it, guided by its light or cursed by its absence. It existed in a liminal space, both in the world and outside of it, a monument to hope, despair, and the delicate balance of attention and memory. Gengar drifted toward it under the silvered gaze of the moon. Its form rippled like smoke, eyes glimmering violet, reflecting the fractured light of the stars and the fractured history embedded in the lighthouse's walls. It had come here many times before, yet each arrival felt like a first encounter. The building was more than stone and mortar. It was a repository of emotion, a vessel containing the weight of lives that had passed by it, of hands that had touched its railings, of eyes that had searched its beacon in desperate nights. The wind carried the faintest scent of salt and decay, mingling with memory. Gengar hovered near the crumbling door, feeling the pulses of past events. Inside, the spiral staircase was warped, the steps groaning faintly under the weight of forgotten footsteps. Each creak echoed through time, harmonizing with the shadows that had gathered over decades. At the top of the staircase, the light chamber awaited. Broken windows let the wind swirl in, carrying the scent of the sea and the faint, lingering traces of oil and flame. Here, Gengar felt the strongest pull of memory. It was as if every night the lighthouse had ever shone, every ship that had navigated by its beam, every soul that had prayed for its guidance was condensed into this fragile space. It began as whispers, faint, indistinct, but unmistakable. Voices of sailors long gone, of keepers who had devoted lifetimes to tending the light, of travelers lost at sea, all reaching out, seeking acknowledgement, seeking remembrance. They rose in a chorus that was neither mournful nor joyous, but simply insistent. They existed, and they wanted to be seen. Gengar let its shadow curl around the chamber, drifting along the cracked floor and shattered windows. Its laughter rose softly, a counterpoint to the whispers, acknowledging the existence of the voices, embracing their presence. It was a sound that carried centuries of experience, a sound that said, "I see you. You are not forgotten." Then, it noticed movement near the edge of the cliff. A young man, small and fragile against the vast expanse of sky and sea, approached the lighthouse. He did not knock, he did not enter. He merely gazed upward, drawn by some unseen force. His eyes reflected the moonlight and something deeper, a need to connect, to understand, to feel the weight of what had been left behind. Gengar moved toward him, its form stretching like a living shadow across the cliff. The man flinched, yet did not flee. He could sense the presence, a weight that was neither threatening nor hostile, a consciousness older than he could comprehend. Do you guide them?" the man whispered. His voice trembled with awe and uncertainty. "Do you watch over them?" Gengar's shadow rippled over the rocks, brushing faintly against him. "I watch. I remember. I carry what the world forgets, and I acknowledge what the past leaves behind." The man nodded slowly. I've seen the ships. I've felt the storm. I've prayed to the light, even when it did not shine, and I thought it was gone. But it's not entirely." "No," Gengar replied, curling gently around him. "Not entirely. Memory persists. Hope persists. Even when humans abandon it, it survives in the unseen, in the shadows, in the hearts of those who notice." And the sea. Faint lights shimmered in the distance, spectral echoes of vessels that had sailed decades, even centuries, before. They flickered on the horizon, guided not by the present beam, but by the memory of light, preserved in the awareness of shadows. Gengar traced them with its form, its laughter mingling softly with the murmur of waves. Inside the lighthouse, Gengar moved through the chamber, touching the remnants of oil lamps, the faint glow of glass, the creaking gears of mechanisms long rusted. It recalled the keepers who had tended them, the hands that had polished brass and glass, the eyes that had scanned the horizon for danger. It remembered every failure, every success, every sigh of relief, and every cry of despair. Each memory pressed against it, yet Gengar bore it effortlessly, as it always had. The young man followed, drawn by the ripples of shadow and memory. He reached the top, his breath caught between awe and disbelief. Gengar hovered beside him, letting him see the fractured reflections of countless lives in the shattered glass. The man's hand trembled as he reached toward a faint shimmer, brushing a fragment of memory, feeling the echo of a life he would never know. yet sensing its importance. They were here, he murmured. All of them. Every life, every soul, and you remember them? I remember, Gengar said, because no one else can or will. And because they deserve it. Memory is not lost. It persists where acknowledgement reaches, and acknowledgement is my task. The man nodded, eyes misting with unshed tears. Then, I will remember too. Even if I cannot carry it all, I will remember some. Gengar's form rippled softly. The lighthouse responded. A faint pulse of light shimmered through the broken windows, reflecting off the waves and mist, as if acknowledging the human's promise. Shadows shifted in harmony with the memory, and whispers softened into a quiet song that echoed across the cliff and into the vast sea. For hours, the three existed in quiet communion. Gengar, the lighthouse, and the young man, bound together by memory, hope, and acknowledgement. Every story preserved, every whispered hope, every fragment of life lost or abandoned was honored. Time had no meaning here, only the flow of recognition and the gentle rhythm of remembrance. Eventually, the young man rested against the railing, exhausted but serene, carrying within him a fragment of what Gengar preserved. The lighthouse, though broken and abandoned, shimmered faintly with the pulse of memory, its presence both tangible and ephemeral. Gengar hovered nearby, its shadow curling protectively, letting its soft laughter mingle with the whispers of sailors and keepers long gone. "Will you always be here?" the man asked softly. "Where there is memory, I will be," Gengar replied. "Where hope persists, I will watch. Where shadows gather, I will guide. And where acknowledgement is offered, I will remain." The wind carried faint echoes of laughter and sighs, of promises kept and forgotten, of hope and despair intertwined. Gengar drifted along the cliff, tracing the edges of the lighthouse, touching the remnants of memory, ensuring that nothing was lost, that every soul's echo was honored. As dawn approached, the first light touched the horizon, painting the waves gold and silver. Gengar lingered for a moment longer, its violet eyes reflecting the sea and sky, the lighthouse, and the countless lives it had preserved. Then, it drifted back into the forest, into the shadows, carrying the weight of centuries and the quiet joy of acknowledgement. The young man watched the sunrise, holding the memory in his heart, feeling its weight and warmth. The lighthouse, though abandoned, still pulsed faintly with the remnants of its light. And somewhere in the space between worlds, Gengar laughed softly, a sound that carried across time, memory, and shadow, ensuring that the stories, the lives, and the hope preserved in the lighthouse would never be forgotten. Time flows differently for a shadow. For a creature born of laughter, sorrow, and memory, centuries fold into moments, and moments stretch into eternity. Gengar had drifted through forests, lakes, cities, and forgotten gardens, carrying the weight of memory, the echoes of laughter, and the remnants of sorrow. It had witnessed humans forget, ignore, and abandon, but it had also witnessed those rare few who remembered, who reached beyond the visible, who acknowledged the unseen. And now, as the night deepened across the world, Gengar felt the quiet pull of something both familiar and profound. The culmination of all it had carried, the living resonance of every story it had tended. The air was heavy with the scent of mist and earth, tinged faintly with salt from distant seas. Gengar drifted over a hill, overlooking a valley cloaked in silver moonlight. Below, a village slept, its lights dim, its streets empty, yet the air vibrated with faint echoes, the laughter of children long grown, the whispers of lovers long separated, the sighs of elders long past. Every life left traces, and Gengar felt them all. Each ripple of memory tugged gently, reminding it of the countless promises it had witnessed, the vows it had kept, the voices it had preserved. Tonight, the echoes seemed more insistent, as though the world itself were reaching out. Faces emerged in the shadows, faint, spectral, yet vibrant, with the residue of attention and love. Gengar hovered above them, its form curling like smoke, eyes glimmering violet, grin wide yet softened by centuries of contemplation. It had always known that memory was fragile, that acknowledgement was rare, and that time could erode even the strongest bonds. Yet, in this moment, Gengar sensed a convergence, a singular resonance of remembrance that threaded through every shadow it had ever tended. It began in the village square, where a young girl lingered under a tree, eyes closed, hands cupped as if holding something invisible. She was unaware of Gengar at first, yet her presence radiated attention, recognition, and care. She was not unique in being human, so many had existed, but she was unique in her willingness to remember, to acknowledge, to feel the weight of what others had abandoned. Gengar drifted closer, letting its shadow ripple softly across the cobblestones, brushing gently against her presence. "I can hear them," she whispered. "I can feel them, all of them. Every laugh, every cry, every promise. They're alive here, aren't they?" "Yes," Gengar replied, its thought carrying without sound. "They persist because someone cares. Memory, once tended, never truly fades. Laughter and sorrow, joy and grief, hope and despair, they all remain, woven into the fabric of what is unseen." The girl opened her eyes and saw the ripple of violet shadow, the faint gleam of eyes that reflected centuries of care. She did not flinch. She did not cry. Instead, she smiled, extending her hands as if to touch something just beyond perception. The shadows responded, swirling gently around her fingers, rising to meet her acknowledgement. Across the valley, the echoes converged. Faces from forgotten gardens, whispers from distant lighthouses, reflections from misty lakes, all rose like mist, drawn to the resonance of recognition. Gengar guided them, weaving them into a delicate tapestry of memory, ensuring each story found its place, each laugh and cry acknowledged. Ghastly and Haunter appeared, playful yet reverent, circling through the air in gentle arcs, adding their own laughter to the chorus of echoes. Gengar thought of the boy by the lake, the girl in the city alley, the keepers of lighthouses, the silent promises of ancient forests. Each thread strengthened the others, forming a network of memory that stretched beyond time, beyond space, beyond the limitations of human perception. The echoes were no longer isolated. They were a living symphony of remembrance, and the girl in the square was its conduit, its first spark of awareness in centuries. "Why do you do this?" the girl asked softly. "Why carry all of this weight? Why not let it fade?" Gengar let its shadow ripple around her, enveloping her in warmth even as it remained intangible. "Because someone must," it said. "Because to forget is to diminish the world. To acknowledge, to remember, is an act of creation. I carry what humans cannot or will not, and in doing so, I ensure that their lives, their laughter, their sorrow, and their love endure." The wind stirred, carrying whispers and faint laughter across the valley. Faces shimmered in the shadows. A child laughing by a fountain, a sailor clutching a rope in a storm, a lover kneeling in moonlight. All were fragments of life, yet in this moment they formed a whole, unified by acknowledgement and care. Gengar moved among them, a guardian and witness, weaving the fragments into harmony, letting every echo find its voice. The girl reached toward a particularly fragile memory. A small, pale child sitting alone by a broken window, eyes wide with fear. As she acknowledged the presence, Gengar felt the ripple of recognition strengthen. The child's form brightened, the fear softened, and the echo of laughter emerged faintly. A sound almost tangible. Gengar's own laughter rose, mingling with it. A gentle curl of sound that carried centuries of understanding. Hours passed, though in the space of memory, time was irrelevant. The valley pulsed with the quiet rhythm of lives remembered, promises acknowledged, laughter preserved. Even the most tragic echoes, the cries of loss, the sighs of despair, were woven into the tapestry, balanced by moments of joy, hope, and recognition. Gengar drifted among them, patient, constant, a bridge between the living and the unseen. Eventually, the girl grew tired, kneeling in the square, hands resting gently on the cobblestones. She smiled, soft and serene. carrying the weight of the echoes she had acknowledged. Gengar hovered nearby, stretching its shadow protectively around her, allowing the valley and its memories to pulse in quiet harmony. "You will stay?" she asked softly, eyes half closed, and trusting herself to the unseen. Gengar's violet eyes softened. "Where there is memory, I will remain. Where there is acknowledgement, I will endure. Where there is laughter, sorrow, hope, and love, I will continue to watch, to care, to carry. I am the echo that never fades." Whispers of lives long gone intertwined with those of the present, creating a harmony that resonated through shadows, trees, and stones. Gengar drifted above, observing the convergence, feeling the fullness of purpose it had cultivated over centuries. It was not merely a shadow, nor merely a guardian. It was the living memory of the world, a witness to joy and sorrow, a carrier of the echoes that define existence. As dawn approached, the first pale light brushed the valley, touching the stones, the trees, and the sleeping village. The girl opened her eyes fully, feeling the weight of acknowledgement within her heart. Gengar hovered above, the mist curling gently around its form, carrying centuries of laughter, grief, hope, and love. In that moment, Gengar understood the ultimate truth of its existence. To remember, to acknowledge, to preserve, is to give life to the unseen. Shadows, laughter, sorrow, and joy, they persist through recognition, through care, through attention. And as long as there is a single human willing to see, willing to feel, willing to remember, Gengar's work endures. With one final ripple of its form, Gengar extended across the valley, touching every echo it had ever carried, every shadow it had ever guided, every memory it had ever preserved. The whispers harmonized into a faint, enduring song, a melody that would persist beyond centuries, beyond worlds, beyond even the perception of the living. And in that song, in that convergence of memory and shadow, Gengar found peace, not finality, not rest, but fulfillment. For it had become what it was always meant to be, the echo that never fades, the keeper of what humans forget, the bridge between worlds, the witness of everything that is, and all that ever was. And as the sun rose, painting the valley gold and silver, Gengar drifted into the shadows once more, carrying with it the quiet, eternal knowledge that nothing is ever truly lost when it is remembered.